Hi everyone, it's Cam here. Welcome you to another episode of The Build Room. In this week's episode, we are hunting for rust, which means we're going to pull the guards and the bonnet of Violet Crumbles, and we're going to check some of those commonly rusted but hard to see places and see how bad this thing really is. In addition to that, there's a delivery here that I've been waiting to unbox, which has got some sheet metal and some spare panels, so we can check those out too and see what sort of shape we're in. So stick around and check it out. Okay, so we did that initial walkthrough way back in episode 1 and tried to pick up all of the rust spots that were here. And to be honest, there were quite a few, but it wasn't as bad as some cars, especially if you happen to live in a state that is cold all the time or has icy, salted roads. But there are a couple of areas that are just really difficult to check until you start actually pulling off panels. So that's what we're going to do today. Now I'm going to show you the process on the passenger side guard because that's the one that looks the worst to me at the moment. If we have a look at the bottom of the panel, you can actually see that it's rusting all the way through the sheet metal. And there's a lot of bubbling around it, and I did loosen this panel already basically when we were doing the repair to the chassis rail in this side. I was going to remove the panel just to make it easier, and then I thought I would be able to get away from that and repaired it without removing the panel, which was possible, but it made things slightly more difficult. But I thought I'd had a win until I got around to thinking about how I'm going to spray the undercoat into there, and that's going to be much easier if I just bite the bullet and pull the panel off. The reason I didn't want to pull the panel off is because to remove the panels on an RA23 Celica, the front bumper here pretty much overlaps everything. You can see that it overlaps the front guard and it also overlaps all of the front headlight trim and bits and pieces. The only bonus that I've got going for me is that this is a bit wobbly at the moment, and I think that's some accident damage. It's been hit in the front, potentially at the bottom of the bumper. So technically speaking, I could probably pull these guards out, especially because I don't really value them too much or they're gonna have to be painted. But for those of you at home that are playing with cars that you don't want to damage or are nicely painted, or you just want to do things the right way, which is probably the way we should do it, we are gonna start by removing the bumper, and then we're gonna take the bonnet off. You don't have to take the bonnet off, but that's gotta come off anyway. So we're gonna take the bonnet off and then we'll pull the guards and see where we're at. This is probably the last time for a while that this car is gonna look as good as it does now. So let's take one last look and then get stuck into it. Okay, so if we take a look down in the engine bay, you can see those two bolts down at the bottom there on that bracket. Now they are the two front bumper bolts. There's also two on the other side of the engine bay underneath the water bottle. So you don't have to pull out the battery and the battery tray to get to those bolts, but it certainly does make it a lot easier, as you can see here. On the other side over there, again, removing the washer bottle and things like that will make your life easier, but you can access them without doing that. So we're going to take all those four bolts out, and then the front bumper will come off, and then we'll take out the two bolts on either of the mounts for the bonnet. We'll get the bonnet out of the way, and then we'll take a look at the guard. And then for the front guard, we've got a row of M6 bolts here. These have got a metric 10 head on them. We're going to remove all of those. And then behind the door, there's another bolt hole you can see just down there. Now that one, again, I think I also took that off when I was going to take the guard off before. But yeah, there's normally a M8 bolt with a 12mm head holding that in. And then from the underside of the car, there's two bolts. One's normally here and there's one just further up there. They are hard to get to with the bumper in place, so that's part of the reason why the bumper has to come off. And they attach this front valance to the guard. And then once you've got those off, there's another two bolts. We'll look at the back of them here and here. And you can try getting all of these out without taking the bumper off, but it's next to impossible, and you are going to waste more time than you would just pulling it off the right way in the first place. Ask me how I know. Also, when you're taking the front bumper off, you will need to deal with the cables for the indicator, which is that white cable going through there. And basically that will come out inside the engine bay, and it's just one plug there that you just have to unclip and run through. Same goes for the indicators. So I've already unclipped the indicator one, but that normally goes through a grommet up the top of the guard. Same goes with the driving lights. They have a loom that runs through them, and into the engine bay you have to disconnect that as well. Actually, I might just pull the bonnet off first because that's going to make it a little bit easier to get the bumper off. Just one thing, there's also this stay here. Now mine's only got one bolt in because the other one's been snapped off, but make sure you take this off as well before you try and pull the bonnet off, because otherwise you're going to run into a problem. And that is an M6 bolt with a 10mm head. Okay, we're part way out, one more bolt, which I've got halfway removed. They're long bolts. Okay. There we go. Right, now if we look at this side, you can see why that bumper might have been having troubles. I'd say someone's tried to remove this before. Very poorly. Neither of these bolts are done up properly, and there's actually no bolts on the back of the indicators here. Now that's weird, because removing those doesn't let you take the indicator out. You actually have to take the whole bumper off the mount before you can get the indicator out. So yeah, I'd say someone's tried to pull this apart, been not quite sure how to do it, and then got frustrated and given up and never put this stuff back together. Okay, the moment of truth. First check is for spiders. Okay, so looking at the back of this guard, you can see we have a lot of corrosion here. This is actually a 2-layered piece of metal, and I would imagine that what I'm touching now is probably body filler. Someone's had a rust hole and then thought, oh yeah, I'll just bog this up and move on, and this is what happens. It's really, you can see the amount of leaf litter and stuff that's caught in it as well. That basically comes out of the cowl. So this is not the worst I've seen, but it's not great. But other than that, we have a look. The rest of the guard is quite good. So looking through here and then down here, you can see the area that's protected by the splash shield. This is the difference that it makes. We can see along the back, these are excellent until we come down to here, but we can fix this internal bit, and this skin's pretty easy to fix as well. If we look at the edge of the fender, it's all pretty nice all through there. Doesn't look like this has ever really had any accident damage that's been big enough to obviously damage this piece anyway. The only real area that's not so great is up here. If I turn the light around and shed some light on this, you can see in here, this is obviously at the front of the car, it's the least protected, and there is some rust in here and there's some rust around the mounts, but it's not blown through anywhere. So, you know, all things considered, that's pretty nice and neat. So let's have a look at the actual chassis of the car now and see where we're at with that. All right, I'm just gonna pull off the splash guard as well so that we can see a little bit better. Don't mind these spider webs. All right, not too much debris coming out of that, which is good. You can also see that the seal along here is, while it's obviously 50 years old, it's still the original one and it's still in reasonably good shape. And the bottom of it, while it's got some surface rust on it, it hasn't rusted through anywhere. So this is in really, really good shape. These quite often rust out down the bottom here, and they're very hard to find. A lot of people, you know, when they're lowering cars and working on cars, they throw these things away thinking, you know, of a car with maybe 1 or 2 years of the lifespan in their hands, so they chuck these out of the way. Now, if we look at this area here that's been splash guarded, this is actually, again, really, really good. I'm really happy with this. Quite often you'll see these rust out here, or what's more common, and there's a little bit starting here, is just rust where the air intake cowl area here starts to rust out in the bottom. That again is not too hard to fix poorly. It's actually much more difficult to fix really well. So we're gonna have to make a call on what we do with that later. But then moving down, this area here is just starting to get some rust come through the seams. And then down here, we have a little bit of surface rust. It seems to have eaten in a little way, but I'm not sure how far. No penetrations through at this point. And then under here is about the same. So not too bad. What I'm going to need to do is just to check this out now, I might just throw a wire brush onto this and then we can see what it really looks like. Okay, so not as bad as I thought it might have been, not as good as I would have hoped. Not always the way. But you can see here, we have a hole through here. We also have some pinholing starting here and here, and this whole area is really quite pitted. Now, the pitting does show us that this is really rusting from here in. So I'm not too worried about the back side of this. When you start seeing a smooth outside with the rust coming through the back, that's when you've got a real problem. So I think on this, what I'm gonna do is probably cut out some small areas to patch and just check the quality of the metal inside. And if it's garbage, we'll probably have to cut all the way along here and then down here and possibly even fold something along to this lip here so that we can make sure that this is really good. But if I can get away with just patching a corner here and patching a little bit up here and giving it a good rust converter and some heavy duty primer and then fish oiling, we might save a lot of time there. And you know what, provided it's not had significant water in this area behind the panel, we should be okay. So let's go check the other side. All right, let's have a look at the bottom of this panel here. All right, we can see here, there's no breaking of this outer layer. So any rust that we've got is basically just sort of starting to come through, bubbling up on the outside here. So this one looks a lot better condition. I think it'll be a lot easier to repair. Similarly on the inside, you've got the area that was protected by the splash shield here, which all looks really good. And again, really doesn't look like it's had any crash history, but I would say that this one was probably, this is probably not the original fender from the looks of things. I feel like there should be more red primer in here, and then in here you can see silver flaking off. So I feel like that's probably overspray. Which the factory units wouldn't have. They would basically have a light misting of silver. So I feel like this one's probably been off the car. It may not be the original fender, but it's in pretty good condition, so I'm not complaining. Inside the fender, obviously you've got the areas that we repaired in the previous episode. I'll link to that repair. And I did start to pull away the underbody when I was trying to figure out how I'd paint this. But then inside, probably about the same in terms of the rust in this area, a little bit more rust here. And as you can see, oh, that looks like a hornet nest or something, but just in this area right here, see if we can get close to that, it's starting to rust through from the cowl area. But that's all right. That's early intervention as far as I'm concerned. Down here, yeah, this looks much better than the other side. Again, people always seem to bend these. They're either jacking the car up off them, which is just plain stupid, or that's the first point that gets hit when you drive over something. You know, drive over a big curb. Curb goes under the wheel and then smashes down and hits this area. But that actually looks really good. Look, just for the sake of being even, I'll give this a wire brush off and we'll see if there's a comparison to be made. Okay, so if we take a good look at that, that is much better than the other side. I didn't get all the primer off, but you can see past it. I had to bend that. I had to bend this back straight, and as you can see, it does have some rust where it's rusted through the first layer of the pinch weld. So I'll definitely have to cut that out and replace it. But this actually looks pretty good. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to do here. I'm considering actually cutting a inspection hole in somewhere like this that is relatively protected, and that I can put a rubber grommet in later to seal up. That way I can clean all of this out and protect it from the back. It'd really be nice to be able to get some paint and some fish oil and stuff like that through here. But we'll see. If anyone's got any tips of the best way to do this, I mean, I could go whole hog and actually cut this whole section out, pull it off, clean everything behind it, prime everything behind it, even seal it with an epoxy and then weld it back in. But you know, that's the 10/10ths way of fixing this. And to be honest, it's not that badly damaged. So I don't feel like it needs to go that far. So a little bit more rust converter in here, a little bit more time with the wire brush and maybe the sanding flap disc, and we should get this back to something that's pretty good. And then we can make a decision after that. But yeah, considering that is the totality of the rust that's left, and now that I don't have a guard on, this is going to be really easy to undercoat. I am pretty happy. Just a few little bits and pieces to fix as a preventative measure, but no major repairs on this side. All right, so we're in danger of having a very long episode here. So I'm not gonna break the car down any further than this. It's looking much less like a car than it was earlier today. I mean, he's a lively one, this one. Look at her go. Anyway, what I do want to do before I let you guys go is finally unpack this thing. So based on the knowledge of the state of the car, you guys can probably guess some of what's in here. But let's get it on the ground and open it up and take a look. Okay, so this is where we're at. Basically, most obviously, we have a replacement boot lid. None of these are in the greatest of condition. This one's obviously got some paint issues, gonna have a bunch of body filler under it all the way across, or whether this is a situation that's similar to what I think Violet Crumbles is, and that is a shoddy paint job which has made some of the bodywork worse in certain areas. And then we've got a series of parts here that are really just roof cut snippets that are close to where the windscreens bolt in and the sill drip rails and all that sort of thing. So the reason I have these is not to cut out an entire section of roof line like this and replace it with this, because these really aren't in good enough shape to do that. But where they will come in handy is cutting out small jigsaw shaped size pieces that I can weld in from the areas of these that are actually good metal, and welding that into the rusty sections on mine, like up here. Again, covered with tape, but yeah, there's a giant hole here. Same goes on the other side of the car. And I actually have another Celica shell with a whole bunch of other rusty areas that these will make good spare parts for as well in the future. Now, the other thing I do have is another bonnet. So the original bonnet from Violet Crumbles, as you can see, there's two big lines of tape across it, and that tape hides pretty horrific rust behind it. Now, this may be salvageable from someone with better skills than me, but I don't think I'm ever gonna get there, certainly not on this build. So yes, I have a replacement bonnet coming. It's not in the greatest of condition, but it's definitely something that I can work with. And I think that doing the work on that will be valuable for you guys to see. The mistakes that I make, you can avoid. Plus, it's trying to find a pristine bonnet for these. A lot of people represent pristine bonnets, and you look a little bit more closely and they are far from it. And they always want an absolute fortune for them. And they're getting rare. The parts for these are very hard to come by nowadays, and the people that are still holding on to good stuff fairly reasonably want good money for it. That's fair for them to do. You just have to be careful of the people who want to represent a panel as being pristine condition and then actually getting a piece of garbage delivered on your doorstep. Bonnets are also obviously very expensive to freight, so it's really better if you can pick them up in state, and that's obviously hard to do in WA. Okay, so that's where I'm going to leave it for today's episode. Now, I know I haven't shown you a lot of actual work getting done, but that was deliberate. In this episode, I wanted to keep it short, and I wanted to show you a little bit about the condition that Violet Crumbles is in, because it's easy to just watch episode after episode of, I'm fixing this to this week and I'm fixing that next week. But for those of you that are new to the channel and haven't watched the older episodes, or those of you that are just generally interested in knowing more about the car itself, I'm hoping this episode was of value and that you guys enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it, make sure you hit that like button down below so that I know. So that just leaves us with, what are we doing next week? And next week is going to be something a little different. So while I've been working on the car, I have noticed a few more deficiencies on the underside than I thought. And as I've been looking at the boot area, fixing up that rear panel section and some of the other bits and pieces when I've been inside the interior, I've noticed one thing, and that is there's a reasonable amount of surface rust on the floor, which is 100% due to the fact that it had a gaping hole in the roof just letting water in, and a gaping hole in the sheet metal below the rear windscreen that was just dripping water into the boot. And when you have a lot of water in the cabin of the car and the boot of the car, what can happen is that water can get trapped underneath your sound deadening, and it can rust through the sheet metal out on the floor. And obviously, any area that's rusted all the way through the sheet metal, I'll be able to spot by looking at it from the underside. But if there's a significant amount of rust that just hasn't penetrated right the way through the metal, I won't be able to see it because that sound deadener is going to cover it up. Now, there's an old trick that probably a lot of you guys know about getting sound deadening off floors, and that's what we're going to do next week. We're going to pull all of the sound deadening out of that, check the condition of the floor, and basically get that ready to be painted and then recovered with a more modern soundproofing before we put the interior back in. But basically, the way in which I'm going to strip that sound deadening, I am concerned that if I did it after I had fully re-undercoated the underbody of the car, that I would compromise that underbody layer. So stripping the underbody deadener in next week's episode, and then probably a few weeks more before we finally get around to painting that underside. But stick around, I know it's going to be worth it. And as usual, if you're new to the channel, I highly recommend you check out the full Violet Crumbles series, which I'll link to here. And if you're up for something a little bit different, check out the A90 Super series here. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the Build Room. Bye for now.